This is the Commercial Landscapers Podcast hosted by Dave Anderson and Robert Klinkenbeard. This show will absolutely transform your leadership by developing all aspects of your life in business, family, personal and health. Only by fine-tuning yourself will you truly operate as a highly functioning leader. I'm really happy to have you on our podcast today. I'm here with David Anderson, who's my co-host for the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. And we're going to spend about 20 minutes just talking to you about some of the challenges you see out there. So just a little bit of background about Amy. He's the author of Growth Dilemma. He's also the founder and chief executive officer for Multifunding LLC, a Philly-based consulting firm. He's also the go-to thought leader for business financing. He's a sought-after speaker at business and industry events. He writes a weekly column for Inc. magazine and has advised the White House, the Treasury Department, and the Federal Reserve Bank. So, Amy, really happy for you to be on today. So, I feel as though we are just upon the brink of seeing some of the economic concerns. We're now at last day of June, and we're going to go into July. And I feel, I hear from different people that we're just about to start seeing the economic impacts of what we've been going through for the last 3 months. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that, Amy.
So I think that, at least from the matrix of businesses, we have to remember that businesses have been impacted quite differently. And now I'm specifically talking in the US by COVID-19. And almost every business got the PPP. For some people, the PPP meant survival, and it helped them live to fight another day. And for other businesses whose business might be down 10, 20% or flat or in some rare instances is ahead of last year, PPP suddenly gave them an extra bonus of cash on their balance sheet. And they can now use that money to reinvest or reemerge or help them through any future downfalls. So there is, in not all businesses, but in many businesses, extra cash on their balance sheets, and many of them also were able to take advantage of the EIDL program. And I'm hopeful that, at least from the perspective of the entrepreneur, this extra cash will help them weather whatever storm is coming ahead.
That's a good answer, yep. I mean, what type of challenges do you see out there, even just on the general public sector as well? I mean, I hear about real estate, how a lot of the deferment is now beginning to come off. I hear now about unemployment beginning to come away from this. So how do you see, from a general public standpoint, the effects?
I don't think we can even comprehend yet the dominoes of all this. So let's take as an example New York City or any major city in the country. How are people going to get up those elevators to go to their offices and feel safe? And then are people going to go to those offices, and are people going to pay those rent? And if those mortgages start to default, there's like a game of dominoes there. But I just try to think about it, at least from my perspective, is that we can each do what we can do in our own little piece of the world to try and make things better for our employees, our customers, and our communities. So I try not to worry too much about the macro things. I try to make sure that I'm making my little world as strong and solid as possible for the constituents that I serve. And there are programs and initiatives that businesses can still try to take advantage of to help them, to give them opportunities. We don't know what's coming ahead. How long is this going to take? Are there going to be second or third rounds? Will there be a vaccine or appropriate medicines coming on? It's most likely that this is going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step backward for quite a long time. And so our challenge is, as entrepreneurs and business owners, is to manage through that and navigate through that and remain flexible and pliable. And it's quite difficult, but that's what we're here to do, and that's what we need to do.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, Amy. David?
We're starting to hear discussions about, what did I hear it called today? The progressive PPP, the next round of PPP, P4 that's going on. What do you see as the downside for businesses of continuing to take, potential government, subsidies, outlays, and that? Is this, if you look at the numbers of how many people took PPP and the amount they took, I was surprised at how low it is. I think 85% is under $150,000. What should businesses be considering when they look at taking additional government assistance?
First of all, let's talk about P4. So I hope that P4 won't look anything like P3, P2, or P1, whatever you call it. Truth is, different businesses have been hit quite differently. And the first series of programs try to service the lowest common denominator. And I hope that whatever future benefits come out or programs come out will be more targeted towards industries or segments that have been particularly hit hard, or particularly, need help. So I hope that they won't kind of come up with another universal program. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of people got PPP money that ended up not really needing it. And that will hopefully help the economy in the long run, but I hope there won't be a universal program. So that's the one thing. The second thing I hope is that the SBA has played a really primary role in prior recoveries. And there are things you can do to tweak the SBA program by increasing guarantees to 90% and reducing borrower fees and reducing lender fees to encourage the program. The SBA community is rightfully so completely exhausted right now from handling the whole PPP situation, and their work is not done because they now have to manage the whole forgiveness component of it as well. But I do hope in whatever next generation of work comes, they will consider the PP, using the SBA as a tool, as a pre-existing tool to help.
Makes sense. As you look at across the industries that you work with, where do you see some of the greatest, let's be positive and call it new opportunities for businesses to evolve based on what's going on, and those that will, have the resources, to evolve and, make it through this?
Some of that's industry related and some of that's culture related. And the question is, which businesses and organizations have been able to reignite their entrepreneurial flame and to keep pushing through and motivated through this? So as we all know, usually when people start a business, they're fearless and they are just think they've got the world down and they just take dumb risks. And sometimes, not all the time, but they think the world is their oyster. And then over time, as businesses grow and mature, we naturally become more conservative because there's more to protect. And really, the industries and the companies that I think are going to survive this, I don't care so much about what industry they're in. I care about their ability to reignite that flame. I know of some restaurants that are up because they've figured out how to make an incredible takeout business or catering or some things. And I know some restaurants that they're ready to shut their doors. So how can we reignite that entrepreneurial flame in businesses? And depending how big and complex they are, that's not that easy to do.
That's a great point. Robert, I'm going to ask one more question and turn it back over to you, but I really appreciate the culture part of that answer that you talked about. So for those of us that have controllers, CFOs, and all the rest mixed with the entrepreneurial spirit, what advice do you have to get the finance side of your business during these difficult times to take the risks, look for those opportunities when more traditionally, they're conserve cash, spend less, let people go? And what role does the finance arm of business play in that culture?
Well, the finance arm takes an important role because you need to use them to take advantage of as many programs and bolster up your balance sheet and get as much cash as possible. So you still need that role for the finance role. However, if there's a balance between entrepreneurship and risk, or administrators or process people, as there is in every organization, this is the time that the entrepreneurs have to win and dominate. And you're going to have to give up. If companies aren't willing to take more risk and be more pliable and more flexible and more innovative today, they might as well go home. And that's just the way it is. And whether it's fair or it's not fair. So it's a matter of how pliable and adaptable can you be to understand what the new horizons look like and what it does. I think about in my own little world, how my world has completely changed on its head. And the reality is we've adjusted to it. And if we hadn't adjusted to it, we would have shut our doors 3 months ago.
Yeah, and on that point, I mean, one of the terms I've heard used recently, and it's somewhat controversial, but I think it's spot on, is land grab. Entrepreneurs have this opportunity now to innovate and try and see what opportunities are out there, and effectively grab as much competition or business as possible. So I think I had a chuckle when I heard that term. But going back to a point you were making a minute ago, I feel as though there's been this chapter we've gone through over the last few months has exposed a lot of good and bad relationships companies have had with lending companies, especially banks. And people are really finding out who are their good true partners going through this. What have you seen through this, and how would you recommend to business owners and how to reevaluate that relationship and look to strengthen their position in the future?
Yeah, so it's interesting. My position on that is yet to change. I don't like working with big banks, and I don't think small to medium-sized businesses should work with big banks. I think they should work with regional or community banks in their areas where they can have a relationship and there's a good vibe and sense of what's going on. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that it's the smaller community or the regional banks that really stood up with the PPP programs. And I think a lot of business owners began to realize and understand the inflexibility of the much bigger banks. And I hope that they'll remember that lesson and they will start to shift their relationships to the smaller or more regional banks where somebody and the greatest likelihood is that person's not going to move jobs every 3 months.
And as a follow-up to that, how do you start that evaluation? What are some of the things you should be looking at when you start on that journey? Maybe you're with a big bank right now and you want to go out and talk to 2 or 3 other local or regional banks. What type of, do you have a list of 2 or 3, 5 things you should be looking at when you go through that search?
Yeah, you should look at, I think, what their lending capabilities are and maybe do a lending check-in. What you have now, what you could have, and are your lines of credit large enough? Does your term debt make sense? Does your balance sheet make the most sense? And how would other banks think about that? And then also, what are their banking capabilities vis-a-vis your requirements? And are they able to, it's definitely one of the advantages some of the bigger banks usually have is they have slicker banking interfaces. But you'll be surprised many community banks have almost all of that, maybe in a different capacity. So checking that out as well. But I do hope that one of the lessons from the PPP is that, sometimes in a big bank, you're just a cog in the wheel. When you need it, that's not a great place to be.
So I'm going to speak to you from experience, having just gone through this with my bank, who was, I would say, a larger regional bank, not one of the big ones we heard so much. But, shortly after going through the process, we found out that they were calling our line of credit. Now, luckily, had a 0 balance on it, but that they were calling it. And I can see, talking to some others that have gone through it, that some banks are maybe preparing for the worst and ratcheting down on companies that maybe they would have given more leeway to before. What conversations should our people who are listening be having with their banker right now, even if maybe your line of credit isn't coming due or something, so you don't get surprised at renewal time or other things? What are some proactive steps we can take?
I think there are 2 things. One is, I always say possession is 9/10 of the law. So in an uncertain economic environment, if you have undrawn line of credit and the rates are pretty low, I don't think it hurts to draw it down and keep it in your bank account. That's the other one thing. And the other thing is, I do think it's a serious opportunity to look at, and I've always say this, that the SBA, I mean, everyone's business is a little bit different, but if you have an SBA loan, the banks don't have nearly the flexibility to shut you down or shut down your line or things like this as they do if it's a regular banking line with their product directly. So like if you had an SBA line of credit, they can't just shut that down just because they want to, because they have to follow SBA regulations also. So it is a smart time to look at and see if the SBA can help you. And remembering also that cash is king now. So say you have a term loan that's amortizing over 3 years or 4 years, and you can go and get an SBA loan and refinance it over 10 years and reduce your monthly payments, especially without any prepayment penalty. That's a good idea right now. And one of the little known secrets is between now and the end of September, if you get an SBA loan, you get the first 6 months of principal and interest completely forgiven as part of the CARES Act. So like on a 10-year loan, that's a 5% haircut on your loan. So there are programs and advanced programs that you can and should consider taking advantage of.
Interesting. Very interesting. Are there other ways to be looking at the SBA things? What are some other programs SBA has that we as mid-sized to small business owners should be looking at?
We use the SBA a lot also for partner buyouts, for acquisition financing. Another interesting thing is if you have equity in your building and you take an SBA 7A loan, and at least say you want to refinance a building note of $1 million, and you have other term debt or line of credit of $600,000 or $700,000, as long as the debt not on the building is less than 50% of your total loan amount, you can re-amortize and you include the building in it, you can re-amortize the entire loan over 25 years. And so sometimes you can make dramatic cash flow improvements. So I've used SBA 7A loans before and improved businesses' cash flow by $1 million a year.
Yeah, it really helps your balance sheet too, huh?
And it just helps you, especially either during that downtime or that growth time, to just cash savings can be tremendous. So it is a smart time, I think, to revisit your balance sheets, to check in. Are there other ways? There's always more than one way to skin the cat. And the question is, are you doing it in the most sensible way for, we're in uncertain times and uncharted times for a while now. Barring some miracle, we're not getting out of this anytime soon. And so prepare yourself with the right tools and structure for that battle. We need to do that.
And what would that look like? Do you have any other, we have all these business owners who are listening to this. What other ways that they could be looking at trying to just make their business healthier and just be prepared for, whatever that looks like, 6 months, a year, 2 3 years?
I think it's a bit of offense and defense, Robert. So one is, financing strategy is always a combination of offense and defense. The defense is like making sure you've got the maximum credit flexibility, you've got the maximum cash flow protections on your program. Then offense is, are there opportunities you can take advantage of? So one of the questions I'd love to ask the groups I work with is, if you had $1 million, I gave you a gift of $1 million this morning that you didn't have when you woke up, and you have to use it to invest in your business, what are you going to do with it? And what returns would you expect from those investments? And suddenly people would say, oh my God, if I had the money, I'd go buy that business, or I'd double my sales force. If I just went and bought that piece of equipment, I could cut my production costs in half, or whatever it might be. And then the next question, if the economics make sense, and you can go borrow that money at 6% on a 10-year amortization, why aren't you doing it? So financing strategy, which kind of sort of digs right into the underwear of a company pretty quickly, is a combination of both offense and defensive thinking.
Are you seeing SBA, aside from PPP and some of the others, definitely being less stringent on loans right now than maybe they were before COVID. Anybody who's gone through SBA, the amount of paperwork you have to do to get stuff done is crazy. But are there any things you're seeing to make it easier to do the SBA stuff?
Not right now, but I won't be surprised if there's legislation coming up which will increase the guarantee amounts, which will encourage banks to take riskier loans. That's the one thing. Other little trick that people don't know about is if you get an SBA loan of $350,000 or less, they'll do that loan without requiring a first lien on all your assets and without requiring a lien on your house. So that's a great way to boost a company with like a little working capital injection. And we do that a lot. So it just helps the company, get pushed through the next level. And you can go get another one of those every 6 months, assuming the program doesn't change. So that's one way to get depending on the company size, one way to get an SBA loan with a lot less stringent requirements.
And is that, a 5-year, 10-year? What is that?
10 years, 6% with the first 6 months of payments completely forgiven right now.
Forgiven or just deferred?
Forgiven.
Okay, I'm just making sure you're saying it. Forgiven.
Forgiven.
We haven't recorded.
We haven't recorded.
Forgiven.
Go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
Okay. I'm going to switch direction on you slightly for our last question. So you've been instrumental with strengthening the relationship between EO and the scaling up organization and organizing these little groups. And we've had people calling in from all around the world and being facilitated by coaches. And, there's been some really cool things that have come out of that. You've been, I say, instrumental in organizing that. So first of all, thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.
What kind of stories or any good things you've seen come out of that? Any things you could share?
It's kind of, again, like every story, often things start with a mistake, right? So at first, again, it talks about the evolution of EO, I think. We were planning, I'm the EO learning chair for Philly, and we were trying to plan a learning event for Philadelphia. And so I asked John Ratliff if they'd consider, doing a little test with us to see if we could break our chapter into some groups and provide a coach and just see how it went, to do a little Reimagine Your Business series. And then sort of by fluke, I put it up in the Learning Chair channel, and one of the members from Indonesia reached out to me to say, hey, could their chapter participate? And frankly, at first, we were quite nervous. Well, this was our chapter, and would there be language barriers? Would there be cultural barriers? Would there be time barriers? And how would it work? And it turned out that in the first round of it, that was perhaps the neatest thing about it, the bridges that were built between members of two different countries. And we broke up into these micro forum groups over a period of days and worked on each other's businesses. And now I think we've done it 3 times, and we're getting ready to do it a 4th time. And we've had members from, I think, 25 or plus chapters and 12 countries around the world participate in the program. And the neatest thing is that usually EOs, you're only really building connections with people from other countries if you travel to GLC or travel to international companies. Now we're building these friendships with other EO members from around the world in these small little groups, which is actually quite great for introverts also. And people are finding incredible value in it. And we're love partnering up with the Scaling Up folks on it. It's been great. And we plan on keeping it going.
No, that's awesome. I've now done 2 of those, and just really cool to see. There was one girl from Kenya who had 180,000 bottles of wine sitting in a warehouse.
Yeah, I told her to mail me some.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. And it was great to see all the group trying to just help and try and figure out a solution for her and seeing how she can pivot her business. And she started looking at things like wine trucks and things like that. So it was just a really amazing experience. So really appreciate you doing that, Amy.
The international part has perhaps been the most fascinating and fun part of it for everyone. And I remember at first some of my chapter members go, well, why are we doing this with other members who we don't know, and that's kind of weird. And I said, let's just try it. And again, it's just because that guy from Indonesia replied to me. We never conceived of it being this way, and it's been terrific.
No, it's been tremendous. Thank you again. So that concludes the show for today. Amy, really appreciate your time today. I think both, not only Dave and I, have got some good nuggets from the call, but I'm sure everybody else that listens to it. So again, Robert Clinkenbeard, Dave Anderson with the Commercial Landscaper podcast, and appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
This was the Commercial Landscaper podcast, hosted by Dave Anderson, author of Leader is Not a Title, and Robert Clinkenbeard, author of The Ironman Mindset for Entrepreneurs. You can find more details about the show and the hosts at the radixgroupllc.com or thecommerciallandscaper.com.